A small housekeeping item for our studio audience today. If you do need to leave, please use the back doors. The front door is locked for the video filming that's going on back here. Our next presentation is actually going to be one of our panels. This panel is titled Challenges in Establishing Infrastructure in Emerging Markets. And I want to introduce our moderator and our panelists, and if you would please come up as I introduce you here. John Hibbard, who's the moderator for this panel. John's the CEO of his own consulting business, Hibbard Consulting, which specializes in international telecommunications, and he was actually the MD of Global Wholesale at Telstra at one point. Our panelists are Andy McLean. Andy, if you would please come up. And Andy is the CEO of Trans-Indonesia Networks. Andy's the founding shareholder and CEO of Trans-Indonesia. And their company has successfully developed more than 6,000 kilometers of optical fiber in Java and Sumatra. Our next panelist is Fabrizio Civitaresi. Here he is, back here. Fabrizio is president of Asia Pacific for Global Cloud Exchange. He's responsible for driving sales and business development across the region. And our other panelist is Paul Blanche-Horgan, who's the CEO of EasyCom. Now, Paul currently oversees the operations of 5 separate companies, which includes EasyCom, Telco Tech, RTI, GSS, and Telemobile. John, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Jeff. And as Jeff mentioned, our topic tonight is challenges in establishing infrastructure in emerging markets. And of course, when we've got Indonesia, we've got Cambodia, and we've got Fabrizio looking after places. Hong Kong's hardly emerging, but he's got tentacles into all of those areas. We've really got the right people here to discuss this topic. And what I really want to do is just sit around and have a chat and let you get the informality and really get the good oil from these people. And we might start with you, Andy. As was mentioned, you've built 7,000 kilometres of cable in Java and Sumatra. Indonesia's always seen as an extremely challenging country to do business. It's one of those ones that sort of intimidates me from the magnitude of it, all of the regulatory stories that you hear. Can you run us through some of the challenges that you face and the obstacles you faced in achieving this very significant network that you've got?
Yeah, thanks, John. Good evening, everyone. To answer John's question, there's not an easy answer to it. People look at Indonesia, like John mentioned, and it's such a big market and it's so exciting and there's so much potential growth that it's pretty hard to resist. But the reality below that surface is doing business there is extremely challenging for a number of reasons. There's regulatory issues that John's mentioned. There's political issues. There's, of course, the thing that people don't like to speak about, which is, corruption that does exist within the society. So it is extremely challenging. And for us to roll a network of our size, we faced a lot of barriers. And firstly was obtaining a license. And that process was long and arduous and expensive. But the government, despite all that, is encouraging competition and has done quite a good job in deregulating the industry, particularly in the mobile market. So for us to obtain the license took a while, but it happened. And then rolling the network was extremely difficult because it's not like in Australia or New Zealand or other countries where under the Telecommunications Act you have the right to install infrastructure. Imagine between Jakarta and Medan, which is about 2,500 kilometres, you're dealing with every local governor, every mayor, every community to obtain access to install a cable or dig a cable underground. So that process was very, very difficult. And the way that we overcame it was we actually negotiated a turnkey contract with Nokia Siemens. So as well as being our equipment vendor, Nokia Siemens bundled the civil works and the cable and provided a turnkey project to us, and we laid off the access risk to them. So they were responsible for obtaining all access along the routes, and to be fair, they did a great job. So I don't want to talk too long, and I could talk for a long time, but there's some good stories maybe for later, I'll tell you. But yeah, it's a country where everything's difficult, but everything's possible. So the world's your oyster, and I'm actually presenting later on the company, and you'll get a bit more detail. But we think we're very well positioned with our network, so it's been worth all the effort. Thanks, John.
So yes, we'll be looking forward to the presentation you're going to do, Andy, in regard to that. But one of the things that has been very topical in recent times is the need for more connectivity out of Indonesia, subsea connectivity. We see cables, 3 prospects for cables from Perth through Indonesia to Singapore. We've just recently heard about the announcement of what is called the CUS cable, SEA-US, Southeast Asia US cable, which is going from Manado in Sulawesi, which is the eastern part of Indonesia, up to Guam, and then over to via Hawaii to the US, which is one of the first cable coming out of the southern part of Indonesia to the world, and will provide them with some diversity from the Luzon Strait. And to what extent in what you're doing does that impact and play a role, present you with an opportunity? How does this new piece of infrastructure in this emerging market really help, one, the country, and let's look at it from your point of view, your organisation?
Yeah, everyone knows the submarine industry is very dynamic, and Indonesia is no exception. And historically, as John's mentioned, most of the cables have gone from Jakarta to Singapore. So Singapore has been, by default, the gatekeeper to a lot of traffic that's come into Indonesia. There's probably been a lot of reasons why that's happened, but politically there is a very strong drive within Indonesian society to be independent, and they won't say outwardly, but they are not comfortable with that cable, most cables going through Singapore. So the new cable that John is speaking about, CUS, which will be Indonesian owned, I think is very favourably seen, and it's going to provide great benefits. It'll definitely, from a commercial perspective, reduce the cost of IP transit coming into Indonesia. And technically it's obviously less latency, and John and I were talking before, the route it's taking out of Manado, it avoids the Luzon Strait, which 90% of the cables go through currently. So, if there's an outage or a problem in that region, this cable will provide diversity to that. Commercially, how telecom operate it and whether the true commercial benefits flow down to companies like us, that's probably a different story, but overall I see it as extremely positive. John's also mentioned the other cables potentially coming out of Australia that will drop into either Java or Sumatra. We see that as being a great thing, because the growth that we've seen Singapore, Jakarta over the past 4 years it's been exponential. I mean, globally the growth is exponential, but in Indonesia it's just going through the roof, and there has been a lot of price decline, but there's still some good margins to be made. So another 2 or 3 submarine cables coming into Indonesia would be good. And with our network in Sumatra, we've given some consideration to extending a cable from either Jumai, which is the middle of Sumatra, either to Malaysia or Batam and then Singapore, or out of Medan itself. So we see that route being quite strategic and diverse. So hopefully that's answered your question, John.
Yes, thanks very much, Andy. It's great to get that insight into a country that a lot of us know limited amount about. And when you think of it, it's got 2, 3, 4, 5,000 islands. I don't know, and a large number of them populated. Getting communications there must be an enormous challenge for the organisers and the carriers in those countries, and even just the processes, the regulatory processes to get approvals. As you described, the daunting task of laying a fibre optic cable through all of these various little territories, mayoral territories, councils and all of that, and all the approvals that you need is something that most of us don't have to experience in other countries. So to achieve what you've achieved, and we look forward to hearing your story, is a credit and a credit to your perseverance, I'm sure. Fabrizio's with Global Cloud Exchange, and where many of us know Global Cloud Exchange from its prior history and all of the activities that it did, and its involvement with FLAG and other similar activities. But Fabrizio, I guess it'd be good for you to give us an update on where you're going at the moment, because a lot of us know with a change of name, we try and put the picture together, and then we can talk about which markets how you're entering these emerging markets and what are the challenges. But you might like to spend a minute or two just giving people an update on that, and then we'll talk about where you've taken the company and what are the issues you faced.
Thanks, John. Actually, thanks also for the opportunity. So we rebranded the company just less than 9 months ago to Global Cloud Exchange. Global Cloud Exchange is still a Reliance company, so it's 100% owned by Reliance Communication. So our major shareholder is one of our largest companies in India. And our history in terms of heritage comes from mainly two businesses. One is the carrier business, the ex-FLAG business, and that was started exactly 20 years ago when the first private cable was planned in 1994 and then went live in 1997, connecting Europe to Asia through Middle East, India, and getting up to Japan. And on the other end, we have also the enterprise business through two companies that we acquired in the last 10, 12 years. One is Venco for providing managed network services, and Yipes, a company that provides domestic Ethernet services in the United States. So what is happening now, and why we rebranded the company into Global Cloud Exchange? The first thing that is happening now is that we are really going very strongly towards an integration of our network from the carrier and the enterprise business, so that we can provide a unique platform to both our customers on the carrier and the enterprise sectors. And also we are implementing our cloud platform. So I don't want to really talk too much about that today, because the topics is more about emerging markets, but you will see in about a month's time we will launch our Global Cloud Exchange platform. That's where our names came from, because one of our priorities in terms of company is to get more active into the cloud space, to provide cloud services to our enterprise customers, but also to be a cloud platform where also our carrier and ISPs and OTT customers can benefit from. And this will be, of course, based on our global network that really underpins our capabilities in the cloud space. Now, going to the second part of your question, John, what are we doing right, and what are we doing in the emerging markets? Well, if you look at our history, so we have heavily invested in emerging markets. So our network is particularly strong in what we call the emerging markets corridor. If you look at the world and ideally span from, you look at the section of the world that spans from Middle East to India to Asia, that's where the majority of the emerging markets are. In, of course, Middle East, including Africa and West, East, and South Africa. and where most of the emerging markets are, and also where most of the growth is. So what we have done, we have invested very heavily so far in cable system in these areas. So we have the FEA cable system, the first cable that was built in RFS in 1997 that connects Middle East, India, and Asia to Europe. Then we built the Falcon cable that connects basically everywhere into the Middle East, and the Oak cable is an extension of Falcon from Middle East to Europe, and that's on one end of the spectrum. On the other end, from Middle East, we go to India, with, of course, with Falcon, and then from India with FEA to Asia. And then what we do, of course, we connect these emerging markets to the US and Europe, because that's where the majority of the traffic today is going. And so this is what we call the emerging market corridor. And the emerging market corridor will see the majority of growth in the next few years. I mean, the prediction is that 70% of the growth in smartphone will come from emerging markets in China and India and Asia. And if we look at the population, we have now 2 billion of internet consumers in these markets. And I mean, if you look at only the population in India and China alone, talking about over almost 3.5 billion, so the potential is really huge. So where are we going? So we have just announced recently, I mean, 2 cables. One cable is the ICX, so India Cloud Exchange. It's a submarine cable that goes from India, from Mumbai to Singapore. And I mean, we will land also branching units, and we are landing on the east coast of India in Trivandrum and/or in Chennai. And what we are considering is also to extending branching units in some of the new markets in South Asia and Southeast Asia. This is, of course, a new generation cable. Current design is for 80 100G wavelengths, so we're talking about per fiber pair, so we're talking about 8 terabit per fiber pair. The initial design is for 4 fiber pairs, but that can be increased, and will be RFS in the second half of 2016. So we are working now on finalizing the supply contract that I mean, it should be signed by the end of this calendar year. So in essence, it's a cable that creates better connectivity between India and Asia, but also has the opportunity to link through branching unit to some of the Southeast Asian countries or the South countries that at the moment are less connected, especially westward. Even Indonesia, I mean, you just talked before, most of the cables that are currently being planned or built are from Indonesia to US. It's true that the majority of the traffic is still driven by the content that is generated in the United States, but it's also true that for Indonesia, there's very growing traffic and interesting content from Middle East, because of course also religious reasons, and Europe. So there's an opportunity for our cable ICX then to work with partners in Indonesia, land it in Indonesia, and then connect Indonesia to Mumbai, India, and then to onwards on our network to Middle East and to Europe. And then the other cable that we have announced is a PCX, Pacific Cloud Exchange, from Japan to US, so one more of the Japan-US cable. So I prevent your question, why? Well, I mean, telegeography is saying that between 2012 and 2019, the 76 terabit of new traffic need on the Trans-Pacific, so we believe that there is space for one more cable, and also it makes sense for us anyway, because I mean it's a part of the world that so far we have covered through partners very successfully, but we feel that given our domestic traffic from India, and also our global presence, we need a Trans-Pacific cable, and that will further enhance our positioning in the emerging market corridor.
Very interesting, especially the discussion of the 2 new cables. Obviously, you preempted the question I was going to say. Is there space for another one? Faster has just announced the cable, basically.
Yeah, well, we aim to be faster than faster.
You're going to be... Well, yes. It raises that question of the name, you know. How do you make it... Is it faster?
Well, we should call it fastest.
Yes. So anyway, it certainly will be a very competitive market between Japan and the US, and potentially as competitive as has been we've seen across the Atlantic. But your other cable, ICX?
ICX,
yes,
yeah.
Lands in India. Now, historically, India's been fairly difficult to do landings and to get agreements there. Can you give us an update on your experience with this cable, of how it's gone? How are things improving? What are the big issues you faced, and how did you get around them?
Yeah, well, it's quite a good question. I mean, luckily our parent company is Reliance Communication, so we will land the cable in the Versova landing station, the same landing station of the Falcon cable that is owned by us. So we don't have a problem. We have our own backhaul going from the landing station to Mumbai CDs, to our DXC center, and of course we will use our parent company network in India to further deliver traffic everywhere in the country. And also we have an agreement with our parent company where we have actually got part of their fiber network for our own use, so that we have also more freedom in terms of upgrades and delivery of content and traffic that we wish in the country. But I mean, it's if you probably know part of our history. So when we landed the first cable in India, the Flag Europe Asia with VSNL at the time, I mean, we didn't have all that freedom. I mean, that cable was landed many years ago, because it was 1997. The market and the world was very different. So we faced some issues with them that at the end, I mean, we solved, and now, I mean, there's a commercial relation that works. So we have interconnected the FEA and the Falcon cable, but it wasn't easy. And it's still, I mean, India in a way is a market where if you don't have a strong partner, or in our case, of course, it's our shareholder, but if you don't have a strong partner, it's very difficult to make an inroad in the market.
Thank you. Paul,
Yes, John.
you're CEO of EasyCom. EasyCom's one of the growth growth carriers of Cambodia, and you've done a lot to bring them up. Paul and I go back many years. He worked for Telstra, and I went in Cambodia, and I had international for Telstra, as was mentioned, and so we had a strong relationship. And now he's stayed in Cambodia and continued to grow business in Cambodia. So you might briefly, I know you're going to talk about your business later, but you've been doing a lot of fibre work in Cambodia within the country. And can you give us a bit of background as to why you've gone about this, and what has occurred as a consequence in regard to the demand for international traffic? So could you just give us an update on that?
Yeah, sure. EasyCom started 7 years ago, and really as an ISP and VoIP operator, and we could see immediately that there wasn't enough fibre, enough backhaul. 4 years ago, I could see the need, obviously, for backhaul and international connectivity, and was growing very quickly. I mean, to give you an idea, from the online connectivity to Cambodia in 2008 was 1 gig. It's now topped 100 gig. So you can see the difference in just those few years. So there was a company called Telcotech, which we bought 4 years ago, which has started to invest in infrastructure and bought shares in the AAG cable, but didn't land it in Cambodia. So we started buying fibre and concentrating much more on backhaul and wholesale and corporate and banking, and it's just developed over this time. We now supply backhaul to most of the operators in Cambodia, and we're going more to that way, away from retail.
And obviously, emerging from that, you've got all these customers and you've got this internet connectivity, and you've made the comment that you haven't got or Telcotech didn't choose at the time to connect to AEG. What are your plans in regard to submarine cables?
Well, yes. I mean, that's something I've been 16 years in Cambodia. I actually went to Cambodia with Telstra. I've been there a long time, and could see over the years we do need our own connectivity because we're landlocked, or not landlocked. Sorry, we don't have a landing station. So the problem with Telcotech was that the cost of landing a cable in Cambodia. So we have to go terrestrially through Vietnam and Thailand, and obvious costs of doing that. So now I will talk about it a bit more, but in the presentation. But we're now doing a cable called the MCT cable, Malaysian Cambodia Thailand cable, which we should be operational by the end of the first quarter of 2016. And we've had to do that now. This is going to help in a lot of ways because not only do we have our own connectivity, which we need as a country, and ASEAN are looking to that all countries should be connected by 2015. So we're a bit late, but we're getting there. And I think this will also reduce the costs on the terrestrial routes. Obviously, they're going to have to come down. So in all ways, it's going to help Cambodia.
Okay, so we've talked about a number of the countries. Let me go back to Fabrizio. You've obviously got connectivity into Indonesia, where Andy is. How do you handle the Indonesian situation? How do you?
Well, today, I mean, we don't have a direct cable landing in Indonesia, but we have a partnership with a few of the companies in Indonesia, including TIN, Trans-Indonesia Networks, and we deliver mostly our enterprise customers through Singapore. So we interconnect with TIN and others in Singapore, and then we use the existing infrastructure that they have to deliver our customers in Indonesia, but mostly our enterprise customers.
So do you think that the point that Andy made about the concerns that exist in Indonesia about the concentration of traffic that goes through Singapore and the desire for greater diversity will impact your business, particularly if you're using Singapore as your focal point into Indonesia?
No, actually we see it as an opportunity because, as I was saying before, for SEX in particular, considering that at the moment most of the traffic that goes from Indonesia westwards towards India, Middle East and Europe goes through Singapore, right? Or just a minimal part goes on SIMW3, but still SIMW3 anyway goes to Singapore. So there's an opportunity there actually to have a direct landing of ICX through a branching unit in Indonesia and then deliver traffic from Indonesia straight to the western world, let's say, or to Middle East and India without touching Singapore.
Okay. Paul, your country, Cambodia, adjoins Thailand where we are at the moment. You obviously have strong relations with Thailand. As you mentioned, much of your past connectivity has had to go through Thailand. How do you see the arrangements and the issues that you face in connectivity into Thailand? Are they changing? How are with all of the turmoil that's been in Thailand in recent times, to what extent do you think that is impacting upon any of the scope for doing business? I'd be interested to get your perspectives.
Yeah, I don't think the situation in Thailand hasn't altered anything what we're doing. We're in a good position because we're basically a hub, or it could be a hub, because we're in the middle of Indochina. And I think we should get a lot of traffic from there, and we'll be able to, with our cable, the submarine cable, we will have diverse routes through Thailand. So I think it'll be a good move, yeah.
So, picking up on that point, picking up on Fabrizio's point, Andy, do you see over time that Indonesia, because of the substantial size of the country, becoming really one of the dominant telecommunications forces within within the Southeast Asian region?
Well, definitely on a population basis, 260 million people, rising GDP and middle class growing with disposable income, you'd say yes. And you can throw a few stats around. There's going to be 50 million smart devices sold in Indonesia this year, and it's a huge figure. Whether it will become a regional power and telco, I'm not sure. But you look at companies like Telstra, from a country with a population of 22 million people, it's a $40 billion company. Compare it to Telcom in Indonesia, and it's got probably 8 times the market cap. So on a per population basis, companies like Singtel and Telstra probably have done it better to date. And I think it's going to take a bit of time for Indonesia, but definitely the potential's there.
Great. Well, I think that's been a most useful discussion, and I'm really looking forward to hearing some presentations from Andy and Paul, and really learning more about these entities and the countries and the issues that you face and the opportunities that you've taken advantage of. So thank you, gentlemen. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John, and the panelists. Are there any questions from the audience for the panel? Surely there's one question. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you very much.